What the hell are you doing here, boy? This ain't Welfare Wednesday. The voice cuts through the morning air at Naval Special Warfare Training Center, Coronado. Staff Sergeant Derek Hawkins stands with his hands on his hips, glaring at a distinguished older black man who just walked through the gates. The man wears pressed khakis and a navy polo shirt, carrying a small duffel bag. His posture is military straight, his steps measured. But Hawkins sees only what he wants to see. "You lost, Grandpa? The soup kitchen's across town." Hawkins storms closer, his boots slapping concrete. Every recruit in the courtyard stops to stare. He jabs his finger toward the exit, his face twisted with disgust. Someone escorts this bum off federal property before he steals something. The older man doesn't flinch. His weathered hands remain steady. His eyes hold decades of quiet strength that Hawkins completely misses. Have you ever watched someone mistake a warrior for a victim, only to learn they were face-to-face with a living legend? Commander James Washington has walked these grounds before. 40 years ago, he earned his SEAL trident on this very sand. The Pacific Ocean still crashes against Coronado Beach with the same relentless rhythm. The obstacle courses stretch toward the horizon like mechanical monsters waiting to devour the weak. Washington adjusts his watch, 0745 hours, 15 minutes until his scheduled leadership seminar with Colonel Martinez. The morning sun warms his face as he observes a group of recruits running PT in the distance. Their cadence calls echo across the compound. 1, 2, 3, 4! Navy SEALs are ready for war! He remembers shouting those same words decades ago. Back then, he was one of only 3 black faces in his buds class. The other 2 didn't make it past Hell Week. Washington touches the small tattoo on his inner wrist, hidden beneath his watch band. The ink has faded over the years, but the meaning remains sharp. A SEAL trident surrounded by ribbons representing the Medal of Honor, Purple Heart, Silver Star. Most people see an old man in civilian clothes. They don't see the warrior beneath. The training facility buzzes with controlled chaos. Instructors bark orders at recruits attempting rope climbs. The metallic clang of weights mingles with the splash of bodies hitting the surf. Diesel exhaust from amphibious vehicles creates a haze over the beach. Washington notices the demographics have changed since his time. More diversity in the ranks, though still predominantly white. He spots a young Asian American recruit struggling with pull-ups. The kid's technique is off, but his determination reminds Washington of himself at that age. Staff Sergeant Derek Hawkins prowls the training areas like a predator seeking weakness. Washington observes him berating a Hispanic recruit whose only crime was finishing second in the morning run instead of first. "Martinez, you think second place gets you on the teams? Second place gets you killed!" Hawkins spits into the sand near the recruit's feet. "Drop and give me 50, and if I see you quit halfway through, you're out." Other instructors watch Hawkins with barely concealed discomfort. They know his reputation. In 5 years as a BUDS instructor, Hawkins has washed out more minority candidates than any other trainer. His methods skirt the edge of acceptable conduct. But no one challenges him. Not yet. Washington continues his walk, his trained eyes cataloging improvements to the facility. New climbing towers, updated medical facilities, better safety equipment. The Navy has learned from decades of training accidents and close calls. A young black recruit notices Washington's bearing and nods respectfully. The kid recognizes something familiar in the older man's walk, the quiet confidence of someone who has seen combat and survived. Washington nods back, a small gesture that speaks volumes. The recruit's name tape reads, Johnson. He can't be more than 22, with earnest eyes that remind Washington of his younger self. Johnson is attempting the obstacle course under Hawkins's scrutiny. "Come on, Johnson. My grandmother moves faster than that." Hawkins checks his stopwatch with theatrical disgust. "At this rate, the enemy will die of old age before you reach them." Johnson pushes harder, sweat streaming down his face. He clears the rope climb but stumbles on the tire run. Hawkins pounces on the mistake like a shark smelling blood. Pathetic! You think your people's athletic reputation means anything here? Hawkins' voice carries across the training ground. This is about mental toughness, something you obviously lack. Washington's jaw tightens. He's heard this rhetoric before, the coded language that questions whether certain people belong in elite units. 40 years ago, he faced the same doubts, the same assumptions about his capabilities. But he also remembers his mission today. These young warriors need to see how a professional handles adversity. They need to understand that responding to ignorance with dignity isn't weakness, it's strength. The base intercom crackles to life. All personnel maintain heightened security awareness. Report any unauthorized individuals to base security immediately. Washington smiles grimly. He's been on military installations for 4 decades. He knows the protocols, the procedures, the unwritten rules that govern military life. What he's about to encounter isn't about security. It's about something much older and more poisonous. The morning briefing board displays today's training schedule. Leadership seminar at 0800. Guest speaker Commander J. Washington, Ret. Someone apparently didn't connect the dots between the name on the board and the man walking through their facility. That oversight is about to create a teaching moment none of them will ever forget. Hawkins spots Washington from 50 yards away, and his entire demeanor shifts. His shoulders square, his chest puffs out, and he adopts the swagger of a man defending his territory. 2 junior instructors fall into step behind him, Petty Officer Richards and Petty Officer Santos, both looking uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge their superior. "Sir!" Hawkins' voice booms across the compound, dripping with sarcasm. "I'm going to need to see some ID and an explanation for why you're on a restricted military installation." Washington stops walking and turns to face the approaching trio. His movements are fluid, controlled. No wasted energy, no defensive posturing. Just the calm confidence of a man who has faced far worse than an overzealous staff sergeant. "Good morning," Washington replies, his voice steady and professional. "I'm Commander Washington. I believe Colonel Martinez is expecting me for the 0800 leadership seminar." Hawkins lets out a harsh laugh that echoes off the nearby buildings. Several recruits have stopped their training to watch the confrontation unfold. Johnson, the young black recruit from earlier, edges closer while pretending to adjust his gear. "Commander?" Hawkins emphasizes the word like it tastes bad. "Right, and I'm the President of the United States." He circles Washington slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. "Anyone can buy military surplus at a thrift store, Grandpa. The question is why you're impersonating an officer on federal property." Washington reaches for his wallet with deliberate, non-threatening movements. His military training is evident in how he telegraphs every action, showing he's not reaching for a weapon. But Hawkins interprets this caution as submission. "Where'd you serve, old man? The cafeteria?" Hawkins steps closer, using his height advantage to loom over Washington. "Let me guess, you were a cook. Or maybe you pushed papers in some rear echelon office while real warriors did the fighting." The insult hits its mark. Washington's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly, but his voice remains level. "I served where my country needed me, Staff Sergeant." "Staff Sergeant?" Hawkins' voice rises an octave. "You will address me as Staff Sergeant Hawkins, sir. And don't give me some vague bullshit answer about serving your country. Every wannabe hero claims they were special forces." Richards shifts uncomfortably behind Hawkins. "Sarge, maybe we should just check his—" "Did I ask for your input, Richards?" Hawkins snaps without turning around. "This is how we handle security breaches. You might learn something." Washington extends his military ID card. "Staff Sergeant Hawkins, if you'd simply verify my credentials with Colonel Martinez's office." Hawkins snatches the ID roughly, holding it at arm's length like it might contaminate him. He studies it with theatrical skepticism, tilting it toward the light and squinting dramatically. This could be fake. Hell, it probably is fake. He waves the ID in the air. You know how easy it is to get bogus military documents these days? The internet's full of scammers selling this garbage to stolen valor wannabes. A crowd is gathering now. At least 20 recruits have found excuses to drift closer to the confrontation. Their training has been forgotten in favor of this unfolding drama. Washington notices their faces, curiosity mixed with discomfort, uncertainty about what they're witnessing. "You've got 30 seconds to walk away voluntarily," Hawkins continues, his voice gaining confidence from the audience. "Or these MPs I'm about to call will escort you off in handcuffs." "Your choice, old man." Washington clasps his hands behind his back in the classic military rest position. The gesture is so natural, so ingrained, that several observing recruits unconsciously straighten their own postures in response. "Son," Washington says quietly, "I understand you're doing your job, but you might want to make a phone call before this goes too far." The word "son" hits Hawkins like a physical blow. His face reddens, veins standing out on his neck. A black man in civilian clothes just had the audacity to address him with paternal authority, in front of his recruits, on his base. "Did you just call me son?" Hawkins's voice drops to a dangerous whisper. "Let me tell you something, boy. This is America's elite fighting force, not some diversity seminar. We don't lower our standards to make people like you feel better about yourselves." The racial undertone is unmistakable now. Several recruits exchange glances, recognizing they're witnessing something that crossed the line from security protocol into something much uglier. Tommy Carter, a 22-year-old recruit with sharp eyes and an engineering background, studies Washington more carefully. Something about the older man's bearing, his perfect military posture, the way he carries himself despite the verbal assault. Carter pulls out his phone, ostensibly to check the time, but actually opens a browser. "You people always think the rules don't apply to you," Hawkins continues, circling Washington again. "You show up where you don't belong, demand special treatment, and cry racism when someone enforces basic security." Washington's hands remain steady behind his back, but his eyes have hardened. Decades of training and discipline hold him in check, but just barely. He's faced enemy fire, survived interrogation, and led men through hell. But standing here being publicly humiliated by an ignorant staff sergeant might be the greatest test of his self-control. "I'm going to conduct a search," Hawkins announces loudly, playing to his audience. "For all we know, this guy's casing the facility for terrorists, or maybe he's got drugs. You never know with these types." "Staff Sergeant," Washington says carefully, "you don't have probable cause to search me or my belongings." Hawkins laughs harshly. "Probable cause? On this basis, I am your probable cause, old man. You're an unidentified civilian on a restricted military installation. That's all the justification I need." Santos steps forward nervously. "Sarge, maybe we should verify with—" "Shut up, Santos!" Hawkins whirls on his subordinate. "Are you questioning my authority? Because I can have you written up for insubordination faster than you can blink." Santos falls silent, but his expression shows he knows something is wrong with this situation. Chen continues his discreet phone research, typing "Commander Washington Navy SEAL" into Google. The search results make his eyes widen. He looks up at Washington, then back at his phone, then at Washington again. His face goes pale as he realizes exactly who is being humiliated in front of them. "Drop the bag," Hawkins orders. "Slowly, and keep your hands where I can see them." Washington complies, setting his duffel bag on the ground with careful precision. Hawkins kicks it away from Washington's feet, the contents rattling inside. "You know what I think?" Hawkins addresses the crowd of recruits as much as Washington. "I think this is exactly the kind of guy who shows up at military bases claiming he's a hero. Probably wants a free meal and a place to sleep. Maybe he'll spin some sob story about being a forgotten veteran." Chen tries to get Richard's attention, holding up his phone screen, but Richards is focused on Hawkins's performance. "Staff Sergeant Hawkins," Washington says, his voice carrying a note of finality, You're about to make a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your career. The words hang in the air like a prophecy. Hawkins' face twists into a cruel smile at Washington's warning. Is that a threat, old man? Because threatening a federal officer is a felony. He turns to address the growing crowd of recruits. You see this, warriors? This is what entitlement looks like. This man thinks he can waltz onto our base and intimidate us with empty threats. Washington remains motionless, his breathing steady despite the provocation. But something has shifted in his eyes, a steel that wasn't there before. He's made a decision about how far he'll let this go. I'm going to search that bag now, Hawkins announces, kneeling beside Washington's duffel. And I bet we find some interesting items. Maybe stolen military equipment, maybe drugs, maybe something that explains why this vagrant is really here. He unzips the bag roughly, dumping the contents onto the concrete. A few changes of clothes spill out, along with toiletries, a worn paperback book titled On Combat by Dave Grossman, and an old brass compass with scratched casing. Hawkins picks up the compass, turning it over in his hands mockingly. Look at this piece of junk. Probably bought it at a flea market and told people it's from Vietnam. He tosses it carelessly onto the pile of clothes. The compass lands with a metallic clink that makes Washington's jaw tighten. What's next? A fake Purple Heart medal? Chen desperately tries to catch Santos's attention, but the petty officer is mesmerized by Hawkins' performance. The Google search results on Carter's phone show multiple pages about Commander James Washington, Medal of Honor recipient, founding member of SEAL Team 6, decorated combat veteran. But no one will look at his screen. Stand up and put your hands on your head, Hawkins orders Washington. I'm conducting a pat-down search for weapons or contraband. Staff Sergeant, you don't have the authority to... Washington begins. I have all the authority I need, Hawkins explodes, spittle flying from his mouth. This is a military installation during wartime. I can detain anyone I consider a security threat. He keys his radio with theatrical importance. Base security, this is Staff Sergeant Hawkins at the Buds compound. I need additional units for a code yellow security breach. Possible stolen valor situation. The radio crackles back. Copy, Staff Sergeant. Units en route. ETA is 3 minutes. Washington slowly raises his hands to his head, the motion revealing more of the tattoo beneath his watch. Carter catches a glimpse of dark ink and recognizes the distinctive shape of a SEAL trident. But from his angle, he can't see the additional decorations that would reveal Washington's true status. Hawkins begins an aggressive pat-down, his hands rough and invasive. You know what really pisses me off? He says loudly enough for everyone to hear. Guys like you who think military service is some kind of participation trophy. Like showing up entitles you to respect you haven't earned. His hands probe Washington's jacket pockets, his waistband along his ribs. The search is unnecessarily thorough and deliberately humiliating. Washington endures it with stoic silence, but his breathing has become more controlled, more focused. You probably tell stories at bars about your fake military career. Hawkins continues his verbal assault while searching. Get free drinks from people who actually respect real veterans. That makes you lower than pond scum in my book. Several recruits shift uncomfortably. Johnson, the young black recruit, looks like he wants to intervene but doesn't know how. The Hispanic recruit Martinez stares at the ground, recognizing the same treatment he's received from Hawkins in subtler forms. Empty your pockets. Everything. Now. Washington complies, producing his wallet, keys, and a small notebook with leather binding. Hawkins snatches the items, examining each one with exaggerated suspicion. What's this supposed to be? Your fake war diary? Hawkins waves the notebook. The leather is worn smooth from years of handling, and the pages are filled with precise handwriting. Tactical notes, leadership observations, quotes from military philosophers. Let me guess. You're writing a book about your imaginary military career. He flips through pages randomly, reading aloud mockingly. Leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in your charge. What kind of fortune cookie bullshit is this? Washington's hands remain raised, but his voice carries quiet authority when he speaks. That's a quote from Simon Sinek. It's about servant leadership. Servant leadership? Hawkins laughs harshly. The only thing you should be serving is time in jail for trespassing. He tosses the notebook onto the pile of Washington's belongings. And impersonating an officer. That's a federal crime, old man. A base security vehicle arrives, its lights flashing red and blue across the concrete. 2 military police officers step out, Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez and Specialist David Park. They approach the crowd with professional caution, noting the unusual scene of a middle-aged civilian surrounded by military personnel. "What's the situation, Staff Sergeant?" Rodriguez asks, her hand resting casually on her radio. "Unidentified individual on base without proper authorization," Hawkins reports formally, puffing out his chest. "Claims to be a retired Navy commander, but his story doesn't check out. I'm conducting a security search per protocol. The subject has been uncooperative and potentially threatening." Rodriguez examines Washington's ID card, which Hawkins reluctantly hands over. Her eyebrows furrow as she studies it under the morning sun. The holographic seal looks authentic, the photo matches, but she's not familiar enough with older military identification formats to be certain. "Sir," she addresses Washington respectfully, "can you explain your presence on base today?" Before Washington can answer, Hawkins interrupts loudly. "Don't bother asking him questions, Sergeant. He's been giving me the runaround for 15 minutes. Claims he has some meeting with Colonel Martinez, but we all know that's complete bullshit. Probably read the Colonel's name off some website." Chen pushes forward through the crowd, his phone clutched in his sweating palm. "Staff Sergeant Hawkins, sir. You really need to see this." "Get back in formation, Carter," Hawkins snaps, his face reddening. "This doesn't concern you." "But, sir, I think there's been a serious mistake." "I said, get back!" Hawkins's voice echoes off the surrounding buildings like a gunshot. "Does anyone want to question my authority? Because I've got enough push-ups to keep you all busy until Christmas." The recruits step back instinctively, but Carter remains rooted in place. Military discipline wars with moral courage in his young face. His phone screen shows a Wikipedia article with Washington's photograph in full military dress uniform, ribbons covering his chest, the Medal of Honor clearly visible around his neck. Washington catches Carter's eye and gives the slightest nod, not permission to speak, but acknowledgement of his courage. The gesture reminds Carter that sometimes doing what's right matters more than following orders. "You want to know what I think happened here?" Hawkins continues his performance, feeding off the attention. "This guy probably saw some military movie, thought he could come play soldier for a day. Maybe get some free meals, some respect he never earned through blood and sacrifice." He circles Washington slowly, like a predator. "Here's the thing about real warriors, old man. We earn our place through pain, through sacrifice, through proving ourselves against impossible odds. We don't get participation trophies. We don't get special treatment because of diversity quotas." The racial undertone is unmistakable now. Rodriguez shifts uncomfortably, recognizing that this situation has moved beyond standard security protocol into something much uglier. Hawkins stops directly in front of Washington and pokes him hard in the chest with his index finger. "Real SEALs earn everything the hard way. Blood, sweat, and more blood. We don't let people fake their way into our brotherhood." The poke crosses a legal line. Washington's eyes flash dangerously, and for just a moment, the recruits glimpse the warrior beneath the civilian clothes. His body coils slightly, 40 years of combat training responding to physical assault. But then he forces himself to relax, remembering his mission and who's watching. "That's assault, Sergeant Rodriguez," Washington says quietly, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "He just committed battery against a civilian without legal justification." Rodriguez nods slowly, her discomfort growing. "Staff Sergeant, Maybe we should verify his story through proper channels before— Don't tell me how to do my job, Rodriguez. Hawkins whirls on her. I've been protecting this base while you were probably still in diapers. This man is a security threat, and I'm treating him as such. He turns back to Washington, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that still carries to the crowd. Strip search. Right here, right now. I want to know what else you're hiding under those clothes. The demand sends a ripple of shock through the watching recruits. Even by Hawkins standards, this crosses into territory that feels fundamentally wrong. Washington's hands slowly lower from his head. When he speaks, his voice carries a new authority that makes several recruits unconsciously straighten to attention. Staff Sergeant Hawkins, he says with deadly calm, I strongly advise you to reconsider your next action. Chen can't take it anymore. Military discipline crumbles in the face of moral outrage as he steps forward, his phone held high like a beacon. Staff Sergeant Hawkins, his voice cracks with urgency. Sir, you need to look at this screen right now. Chen, I swear to God, Hawkins begins. He's Commander James Washington, Carter shouts, his words echoing across the compound. Medal of Honor recipient, founding member of SEAL Team 6. The declaration hits the crowd like a physical blow. Recruits crane their necks to see Carter's phone screen. Whispers ripple through the formation as the name registers with those who know their military history. Hawkins' face contorts with rage. You little shit! I told you to stay back! He takes a threatening step toward Carter. Spreading lies to undermine my authority is insubordination. It's not a lie! Carter holds his ground, his phone screen clearly displaying Washington's Wikipedia page. Look at the picture. Look at the ribbons. Medal of Honor, Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor device. Rodriguez moves closer to examine Carter's phone. Her face goes white as she recognizes the man in the photograph, younger, in dress blues, but unmistakably the same person standing before them with his hands raised. Holy shit, she whispers, then catches herself. I mean, Staff Sergeant, we need to verify this immediately. But Hawkins is too deep in his performance to back down now. His credibility, his authority, his entire worldview depends on being right about this black man being a fraud. Anyone can fake a Wikipedia page, he snarls. You think I'm stupid enough to fall for some internet bullshit? This old man is playing you all for fools. The sound of approaching vehicles grows louder. But it's not more security. It's a black sedan with government plates pulling up to the compound gates. Colonel Martinez steps out, checking his watch. He's 15 minutes late for his meeting with their guest lecturer. Martinez walks briskly toward the compound, then stops dead when he sees the crowd gathered around a familiar figure with his hands raised in surrender position. Attention on deck! Martinez's command voice booms across the courtyard with the force of 40 years of military authority. Every person in uniform snaps to attention instantly, except Hawkins, who spins around in confusion. The automatic response is so ingrained that even Rodriguez and Park come to attention despite being in the middle of a security situation. Martinez approaches the scene with measured steps, his face a mask of controlled fury. When he recognizes Washington standing there with his belongings scattered on the ground, his jaw sets like granite. Good morning, Commander Washington, sir, Martinez says formally, rendering a crisp salute. My sincerest apologies for this misunderstanding. Washington slowly lowers his hands and returns the salute with military precision. The gesture is so natural, so perfectly executed, that even the densest recruit can see this is no imposter. Good morning, Colonel, Washington replies, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who has commanded in combat. No apology necessary. Your staff sergeant was simply being thorough with base security. Hawkins stands frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The color drains from his face as the magnitude of his error becomes clear. Staff Sergeant Hawkins, Martinez's voice could cut steel. Would you care to explain why Commander Washington, Medal of Honor recipient and our scheduled guest lecturer, is being treated like a criminal? Sir, he didn't... I was just... Hawkins stammers, his earlier confidence evaporating. Washington begins rolling up his sleeve, revealing the full tattoo that Carter had glimpsed earlier. The SEAL trident is surrounded by ribbons representing every major combat decoration. Medal of Honor, Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor Device, Purple Heart. The dates show service spanning 3 decades of America's most dangerous operations. Jesus Christ, Santos whispers, then catches himself. Several recruits pull out their phones, frantically Googling Washington's name and finding pages of military history. Commander Washington founded the unit that killed Osama bin Laden, Carter says quietly, his phone displaying a news article. He's in the SEAL Hall of Fame. There's a training facility named after him at Quantico. The weight of their mistake settles on the crowd like a heavy blanket. This isn't just any retired military officer. This is living history. A legend who has been publicly humiliated by their own instructor. Martinez surveys the scene. Washington's belongings scattered on the ground, the crowd of witnesses, the security vehicles with flashing lights. His career military mind quickly calculates the scope of the disaster. Staff Sergeant Hawkins, you will report to my office immediately following Commander Washington's presentation, Martinez says with deadly calm. Petty Officer Santos, please collect Commander Washington's belongings. Respectfully. Santos hurries to gather Washington's scattered items, handling them with the reverence due sacred artifacts. The compass that Hawkins had dismissed as junk bears an inscription, "To Jim, for leading us home, Team 6 Alpha." Washington accepts his belongings with quiet dignity, then addresses the crowd of recruits who stare at him with newfound awe and shame. Gentlemen, what you've witnessed today is why we never judge a person's worth by their appearance. In the teams, the only thing that matters is what's in here. He taps his chest over his heart. Character, courage, the willingness to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. His eyes find Carter in the crowd. Some of you already understand that lesson. Hawkins stands alone, abandoned by his certainty, facing the wreckage of his career and reputation. Hawkins' mouth moves soundlessly, his brain struggling to process the complete reversal of his reality. 30 seconds ago, he was the authority figure putting an imposter in his place. Now he stands before a living legend whose boots he isn't worthy to lick. Sir, Commander, His voice comes out in strangled whispers. Sweat beads on his forehead despite the cool morning air. I was just following security protocols. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know? Washington's response is measured, professional. Staff Sergeant, base security is critical. I understand your vigilance. His tone holds no vindictiveness, no triumph, just the steady authority of a man who has faced far worse than one ignorant instructor. But Colonel Martinez's expression shows no such restraint. His face is carved from granite, his eyes burning with barely controlled fury. In 30 years of military service, he's never witnessed such a spectacular failure of judgment and leadership. Staff Sergeant Hawkins, Martinez's voice cuts through the morning air like a blade. You will report to my office at 0900 hours immediately following Commander Washington's presentation. Do not speak to anyone about this incident. Do not leave the base. Do not even think about making this situation worse than it already is. The finality in Martinez's tone makes several recruits unconsciously step backward. This isn't just administrative discipline. This is career-ending territory. Colonel, sir, if I could just explain, Hawkins begins desperately. There is nothing to explain, Martinez cuts him off with surgical precision. Your actions speak for themselves. The security cameras recorded everything. The witnesses are here. Your conduct has been documented. Rodriguez quietly speaks into her radio, requesting her supervisor respond to the scene. As the senior MP present, She needs to file an incident report that will inevitably make its way up the chain of command. Her career depends on accurate documentation of what she's witnessed. Santos approaches Washington with the gathered belongings, his hands trembling slightly as he offers the duffel bag. "Commander, sir, I'm sorry. We should have verified. I should have said something." Washington accepts his belongings with a nod. "Petty officer, you followed orders from your superior. That's what good sailors do. But remember this moment when you become a leader yourself." The compass catches the morning light as Washington returns it to his bag. Santos notices the inscription for the first time and his face goes pale. He's holding gear that belonged to the most elite warriors in American history. Chen steps forward, still clutching his phone with Washington's biography displayed. "Commander, sir, I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I knew something was wrong, but you found your courage when it mattered most," Washington replies, his voice carrying warmth for the first time since the confrontation began. "That's the mark of a future leader, son. Don't ever lose that moral compass." The gathered recruits hang on every word. They're witnessing a masterclass in leadership, how a true warrior handles victory with grace, how he turns humiliation into a teaching moment. Hawkins makes one last desperate attempt at damage control. "Commander Washington, sir, I want to apologize. I was just doing my job. In today's security environment, we have to be suspicious of everyone. Surely you understand." His words trail off as he realizes he's making it worse. Every excuse sounds hollow. Every justification exposes another layer of his prejudice and incompetence. Washington turns to face Hawkins directly. When he speaks, his voice carries the authority of a man who has led warriors through hell and brought them home alive. "Staff Sergeant, leadership means seeing beyond surface appearances. It means treating every person with basic human dignity until they prove otherwise. Today you failed on both counts." The rebuke is delivered without malice, but it hits harder than any screaming tantrum could. Several recruits nod unconsciously, recognizing profound wisdom when they hear it. Martinez checks his watch with military precision. "Commander Washington, we're already behind schedule for your presentation. If you're still willing to proceed after this irregularity." "Colonel, these young warriors need to hear about resilience and honor now more than ever," Washington replies. This incident provides the perfect context for our discussion. As the group begins moving toward the briefing facility, Rodriguez approaches Martinez quietly. "Colonel, sir, I need to file a formal incident report. This situation involves potential civil rights violations, assault, and conduct unbecoming. It's going to generate significant attention." Martinez nods grimly. "Do your job, Sergeant. Document everything. This needs to be handled by the book." Behind them, Hawkins stands alone in the courtyard, his career crumbling around him like sand. The recruits file past without making eye contact, already treating him like the pariah he's become. Washington pauses at the briefing room entrance, looking back at the man who humiliated him just minutes before. "Staff Sergeant, you might consider using this experience to examine your assumptions about people. Growth comes from our worst mistakes, if we're brave enough to learn from them." Then he's gone, leaving Hawkins to contemplate the wreckage of his prejudice. The investigation begins within hours. By 1400 hours, Naval Criminal Investigative Service agent Rebecca Torres arrives at Coronado with a briefcase full of civil rights violation protocols and a mandate from Washington, D.C. to conduct a thorough review. The security footage tells the complete story in brutal detail. Multiple cameras captured Hawkins's racist taunts, his illegal search, his assault on Washington. The audio is crystal clear. Every boy, every assumption about welfare and soup kitchens, every moment of deliberate humiliation. Agent Torres reviews the footage with Colonel Martinez in his office. The sound of Hawkins' voice fills the room. "What the hell are you doing here, boy? This ain't Welfare Wednesday." Martinez winces visibly. "Agent Torres, I want to be clear that Staff Sergeant Hawkins' conduct does not reflect the values of this command or the United States Navy. Colonel, I've been investigating civil rights cases for 12 years, Torres replies, making notes. This is textbook discrimination with aggravating factors. The victim's status as a Medal of Honor recipient makes it exponentially worse. By evening, Carter's cell phone video had found its way to social media despite regulations against filming on base. The footage spreads across Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok like wildfire. #respect. Our heroes and #Commander Washington begin trending nationwide. The Navy Times breaks the story first. Medal of Honor recipient humiliated at SEAL training base. Within hours, CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC picked up the coverage. Veterans organizations across the country issue statements condemning Hawkins' behavior. Vietnam Veterans of America. President Marcus Thompson appears on CNN that evening. Commander Washington represents the finest traditions of American military service. What happened to him is an insult to every veteran who served this country with honor. The story reaches Capitol Hill by the next morning. Senator Patricia Williams, chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, demands a briefing from the Secretary of the Navy within 48 hours. This incident raises serious questions about systemic discrimination in our elite military units, Williams declared at a press conference. If a Medal of Honor recipient can be treated this way, what happens to young service members without his stature? The NCIS investigation expands rapidly. Agent Torres interviews dozens of current and former personnel about Hawkins's pattern of behavior. The testimonies paint a disturbing picture of years of discriminatory conduct. Petty Officer First Class Miguel Santos provides a sworn statement. Staff Sergeant Hawkins consistently treated minority recruits more harshly than others. He made comments about certain people not belonging to special operations. Multiple complaints were filed, but nothing was done. Former recruit Anthony Johnson, who was washed out of BUDS training 3 months earlier, flies back from his new assignment to testify. Hawkins told me that people like me were quota fillers, that we'd never have the mental toughness for real combat. He made every training evolution harder for the Black and Hispanic guys. The pattern becomes undeniable. 16 formal complaints over 5 years, all dismissed or buried by Hawkins' superiors who didn't want to rock the boat. Minority graduation rates from his training classes were 40% lower than the Navy average. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a military psychologist brought in to evaluate Hawkins, submits a damning report. Subject demonstrates deeply ingrained racial bias and authoritarian personality traits incompatible with military leadership. His conduct represents a systemic failure of the chain of command to address discriminatory behavior. The court-martial convenes 3 weeks later at Naval Base San Diego. Captain James Morrison presides over a panel of 5 senior officers. The courtroom is packed with media, veterans advocates, and military personnel. Commander Washington takes the stand on the second day, his testimony delivered with the same calm authority he displayed during the confrontation. He describes each moment of humiliation without embellishment or vindictiveness. The defendant's conduct was not about security, Washington testifies. It was about putting a black man in what he considered his proper place. I've faced enemy fire in 3 combat deployments. Nothing prepared me for the hatred I saw in Staff Sergeant Hawkins' eyes that morning. The defense attorney, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Beck, attempts to portray Hawkins as a dedicated instructor following security protocols. Her arguments crumble under cross-examination when prosecutors play the security footage. Does standard security protocol include calling someone boy? Prosecutor Major David Carter asks. Does it include assumptions about welfare and soup kitchens? Does it include illegal searches based solely on skin color? Beck has no answer. The evidence is overwhelming, the pattern undeniable. Character witnesses for Hawkins are few and reluctant. His former commanding officer, Captain Robert Hayes, provides tepid support. Staff Sergeant Hawkins was an effective trainer, though perhaps overly aggressive in his methods. But the prosecution presents a parade of witnesses documenting Hawkins's discriminatory conduct. The testimony paints a picture of a man who used his authority to terrorize minority service members while hiding behind the banner of military standards. On the final day, Washington addresses the court directly during victim impact testimony. This isn't about one man's prejudice. It's about the systemic failures that allowed his behavior to continue unchecked for years. How many promising young warriors were driven away by his hatred? How many future leaders did we lose because people in authority chose silence over justice? The panel deliberates for less than 3 hours. Captain Morrison reads the verdict. On the charge of conduct unbecoming an officer, guilty. On the charge of civil rights violations, guilty. On the charge of assault, guilty. On the charge of dereliction of duty, guilty. The sentence is swift and severe. Reduction in rank to seaman recruit, forfeiture of all pay and benefits, 6 months confinement, and dismissal from the Navy with a bad conduct discharge. As military police escort Hawkins from the courtroom, he passes Washington without making eye contact. The man he tried to humiliate sits quietly, showing no satisfaction at his tormentor's downfall. Secretary of the Navy Jonathan Miller issued a formal apology that afternoon. Commander Washington's treatment was unconscionable and contrary to our core values. We pledge to do better, to root out discrimination wherever it exists, and to ensure that all service members are treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. The institutional response is swift. Within a month, new discrimination reporting procedures are implemented Navy-wide. Mandatory bias training becomes required for all instructors. An independent oversight board is established to review discrimination complaints. Captain Hayes, who supervised Hawkins for 3 years without addressing his behavior, is relieved of command and receives a letter of reprimand that ends his career advancement. Commander Washington is invited to serve on the Navy's Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Panel. His first recommendation, mandatory cultural competency training for all military leaders, with real consequences for those who fail to meet standards. The changes ripple through the military justice system. Hawkins' case becomes precedent for aggressive prosecution of discrimination cases. Zero tolerance becomes more than just a slogan. 6 months after the incident, Washington returns to Coronado to address a new class of SEAL candidates. In the same courtyard where he was humiliated, he delivers a message about courage, dignity, and the true meaning of military honor. The recruits listen with rapt attention, understanding they're hearing from a legend who transformed his worst moment into lasting change for their institution. 6 months later, Commander Washington sits in his study in Virginia Beach, surrounded by decades of military memorabilia. Sunlight streams through windows overlooking the Chesapeake Bay, illuminating framed photographs of SEAL teams, presidential commendations, and letters from grateful families of fallen warriors. His phone buzzes with a text from Tommy Carter, now graduated from Buds and assigned to SEAL Team 3. Commander, got my trident today. Thank you for showing us what real courage looks like. Washington smiles, remembering the young recruit who found the moral strength to speak truth to power when it mattered most. Carter earned his place through merit, but he also carries forward the lesson that standing up for others is part of a warrior's code. The institutional changes have been remarkable. Minority graduation rates from special operations training have increased by 30%. The new discrimination reporting system has processed over 200 complaints in its first 6 months, with real consequences for violators. Admiral Patricia Richardson, the Navy's first black female admiral, calls Washington personally to thank him. Your grace under pressure changed everything. Young sailors of color now believe they can report discrimination without destroying their careers. The cultural shift extends beyond policy changes. Military leadership academies now use Washington's case as a cornerstone study in ethical decision-making. His calm response to hatred has become a template for how warriors should handle injustice with dignity. Derek Hawkins serves his sentence at Naval Consolidated Brig Miramar, sleeping on a narrow cot while Washington's example echoes through military institutions worldwide. Upon release, Hawkins struggles to find employment. His bad conduct discharge follows him like a shadow, a permanent reminder of choices that destroyed his life. But even Hawkins' story contains seeds of redemption. Enrolled in court-mandated counseling, he slowly begins confronting the prejudices that poisoned his thinking. The process is painful, humbling, but necessary. "I destroyed my career because I couldn't see past skin color," Hawkins writes in a letter to Washington that remains unanswered. "You responded to my hatred with dignity I didn't deserve. I'm trying to become the man I should have been." Washington doesn't respond to such letters, but he doesn't throw them away either. Redemption is possible for anyone willing to do the hard work of changing their heart. The ripple effects continue spreading. Corporate diversity programs cite Washington's case in training materials. Police departments study his restraint as an example of de-escalation under pressure. High school students write essays about the difference between retaliation and justice. Chen visits Washington quarterly, their mentorship relationship deepening with each conversation. The young SEAL is already being groomed for leadership roles, his moral courage recognized by superior officers who remember his actions that day at Coronado. "Sir, I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't spoken up," Carter confessed during one visit. Washington sets down his coffee, his weathered hands steady despite approaching 70 years. "Tommy, courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what is right when fear tells you to stay quiet. You learned that lesson at 22. Some people never learn it at all." The conversation drifts to current events, to new challenges facing military diversity, to the eternal struggle between progress and prejudice. Washington's voice carries the weight of experience when he addresses the camera directly for his final message. Every generation faces a choice between fear and hope, between division and unity. You can build bridges or you can build walls, but you cannot build both. He leans forward slightly, his eyes intense with conviction. "True patriots don't just serve their country. They make it better for everyone who comes after them. Whether you wear a uniform or not, you have the power to stand up for what's right." The lesson transcends military service, reaching into corporate boardrooms, school hallways, neighborhood streets. Anywhere people gather, Washington's example provides a roadmap for handling injustice with strength and grace. Don't wait for someone else to be the bridge. Build it yourself. Be the person who speaks up when others stay silent. Be the leader who sees potential where others see problems. Washington stands and walks to his window, gazing out at the bay where young SEALs continue training for missions that will demand everything they have to give. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories about everyday heroes who choose courage over comfort. Tell us in the comments, when did you last stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves? He turns back to face the camera, his final words carrying the authority of a lifetime spent defending the defenseless. Here's what I want you to think about tonight. If you witnessed injustice tomorrow, would you be Tommy Carter? Or would you be just another bystander? Because here's the truth. There's a Commander Washington in all of us, and there's also a Derek Hawkins. Which one are you feeding? The camera pulls back slowly as Washington returns to his desk, where a new stack of letters from young service members awaits his attention. The cycle of mentorship continues, one conversation at a time, one act of courage inspiring the next. The world doesn't need more heroes. It needs more people willing to do the heroic thing when it matters most. The screen fades to black, then displays the final message. Honor, courage, commitment. These values belong to everyone brave enough to live them.